Joining us is Jonathan Greenblatt. He is the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, ADL for short. And of course, it's because we continue to get reactions about the deadly massacre that happens near Atlanta, Georgia, the spa shootings that claimed the lives of 8 people. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And how are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm doing fine. I think this morning, all of us are still shocked and saddened by those killings and standing in solidarity with the Asian American and Pacific Islander community.
Yeah, so you guys put out a statement. What did it say?
Well, essentially, look, the ADL is the oldest anti-hate group in the world. We were founded over 100 years ago after the lynching of a Jewish man, indeed, outside of Atlanta. But one of the things that we believe is that even though, like, I'm a white Jewish man, an attack on the Asian American community is still an attack on me, that all of us in this moment really need to stand together. And we've seen too much fear-mongering against Asian Americans for far too long. And I think it's important that not just they in their community, but all of us speak out and stand up and say that this is unacceptable, this is un-American, and we just won't tolerate it.
So one of the main questions I wanted to ask you, we just finished playing the news conference from yesterday with the Atlanta mayor and the police, and they're saying that the suspect has said, even though he's confessed to the shootings, he's saying this was not racially motivated. What's your response to that?
Well, I guess there are a few things to unpack in that kind of claim. So first of all, Georgia, which was one of 4 states that didn't have a hate crimes law, Pilar, until just last year. The authorities certainly look for clear, explicit evidence of motive before they'll apply the hate crimes charge to enhance, if you will, an ordinary offense. They look for specific, explicit intent to harm an individual or an institution because of some immutable characteristic like race or religion or national origin or gender, et cetera. Nonetheless, there are 2 things I would really drill down on here. Number one, the reality is that this man who says he had a sexual addiction or whatever didn't choose to kill women at random. He specifically identified and targeted so-called sort of Asian massage parlors. He sought them out with the intent to murder the women in those places. So there was something very premeditated and intentional. And in his mind, he connected these Asian American business establishments with people who he wanted to murder. So whether he said this is a hate crime against Asians doesn't really matter. Through his actions, he actually manifested a hatred toward Asians, which I think is pretty clear.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay. I just think the second thing that I think is really relevant is we do need to recognize this is happening after more than a year of rising rhetoric against Chinese American and Asian American people in general. I mean, we've been tracking this at the ADL. We're a bit of an early warning system on hate. We started to see it last February when the reports just started to come in about the novel coronavirus coming out of China, and people in positions of authority started fear-mongering. The group Stop AAPI Hate tracked more than 3,800 anti-Asian incidents in the past 12 months, more than 3,800. So whether or not, again, this man said, I want to kill Asian people, we all need to understand that the Asian American community has a great deal of anxiety and fear right now. They already felt traumatized. And the crime, the heinous crime that happened this week only amplifies that sense of anxiety and fear.
Mr. Greenblatt, we wanted to speak to you this morning ahead of a House hearing. It's the House Judiciary Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties Subcommittee holding a hybrid hearing. Of course, that means virtual and in person, on, quote, discrimination and violence against Asian Americans. How does it make you feel that even knowing a hearing like this is on the docket?
I think it's really important. I'm glad you asked that question, Pilar. I think for far too long, the model minority myth, the other perceptions about Asians, have prevented sort of the broader population from realizing what they deal with on a continual basis. But the reality is that the API community has increasing profile and presence, right? In political leadership, I think maybe Senator Hirono is leading the hearing today, but both in the House and the Senate. We see it in the new cabinet of the Biden administration. We see it in business and education and the arts. And yet, though they have achieved, their own stories need to be heard. right? So I think it's important that this hearing is happening. I think it's going to be revealing. I know we'll be watching it at ADL.
Xenophobia, hate, racism. We've been talking about these words for decades, for centuries. Yeah. Are we ever going to get to a place where we're not?
Well, this is really like the fundamental issue. I mean, I think it's important to note, and for your viewers to hear, a lot of times I think there's a tendency to politicize hate, right? To say, oh, it was just this guy or that elected official. The reality is that hate existed, if you will, before the prior administration. It will persist long afterwards, right? The reality is hate is a feature of the human condition. It has simply been with us for the ages. Anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hate, it's often called the oldest hatred because we've got documented examples of it happening over thousands of years. That being said, though it's, I think, a part of our existence, that doesn't mean we can stand down. In fact, I think it means we need to speak out, push back, not accept this part of the status quo. And I must say, I think America is the greatest country in the history of the world, and how it's brought together people from all countries, from all walks of life, given so many opportunities. And so if we really want to realize the aspiration of the founding fathers, e pluribus unum, whether you're a Latina woman, a Jewish man, an Asian American person, African American, Muslim, however you identify, we are all in this together, and fighting hate is all of our responsibility.
The statement that you guys put out yesterday, it was a joint statement, not just from the ADL, but also the Committee of 100. Can you please elaborate and tell me who they are?
The Committee of 100 is so important. They are an organization of Chinese Americans. They were founded maybe 20 years ago. Yo-Yo Ma was one of the original people who put it together to build relations between China and the United States. And this is something that I, as a Jewish person, really relate to. So there are Chinese Americans who are loyal, deeply loyal to this country, who yet want to see better relations between the US and China. And our interests aren't always aligned. That's pretty clear. The government in Beijing does a lot of things that we deeply disagree with, profoundly. And yet, that doesn't dissipate from the love and the patriotism that Americans living here may feel for their ancestral homeland. And I relate to this as a Jewish person because I am profoundly and unabashedly a patriotic American, but I also have an affinity for my ancestral homeland of Israel, right? It is the homeland of the Jewish people. And so I think just like American Jews want better relations between the US and Israel, so too do many Chinese Americans want better relations. And the Committee of 100 is an organization founded for that purpose. So in this moment, for the ADL and the Committee of 100 to come together and to say, despite the fact that we are not exactly the same, we think America has to push back against hate. I think that's a profoundly important moment. And honestly, Pilar, it's an amazing American moment that these two different groups can come together and say, America is no place for hate.
I do want to read a specific line. It says, quote, with additional funding, education, and action, there is a chance to put these horrific incidents in the past and move forward as a nation.
I absolutely believe that, like I said earlier, while hate has been with humanity since the beginning of time, it is still a learned, product. As in, with education and programming, we can teach young people, kids, not to hate. And at the ADL, we deeply believe we've got to do advocacy to change laws to protect all Americans, regardless of how they identify. And we need to work with law enforcement to arrest the perpetrators and make sure they are fully prosecuted for their crimes. But ultimately, the best way to stop stereotypes is to interrupt the intolerance before it takes root. So the ADL was committed decades ago, not just to try to arrest our way out of hate, but to change hearts and minds. Today, we're one of the largest providers in the country of anti-bias education for children. And look, there's nothing, sinister about it. It's about helping young people understand that America is indeed a melting pot. And at the same time, it's a mosaic, and all different people from different walks of life, from different nationalities, from different faiths, can come together in ways that make this country richer for that experience. So I believe in this kind of work. And I think with education, we've got an opportunity to ensure that the next generation doesn't carry on this, if you will, virus of hate. Education is the best vaccination against prejudice.
You've been very elaborate and passionate this morning. Really appreciate it. But I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to tell me or our viewers?
Well, the one thing I would note is that, again, we are living in a very precarious moment, Pilar. Yesterday, the ADL, which again has been tracking extremists for decades and decades, we released a really important report on white supremacist propaganda. And in 2020, we saw more incidents of white supremacist propaganda in this country than the ADL has ever tracked, more than at least a decade. We saw well over 5,100 acts of leafleting, flyering, stickering, banners, demonstrations, events all over the United States, in all 49 states, with the exception of Hawaii. It averages out, Pilar, to 14 incidents a day, and it was nearly double the number in 2019. So we released this report in the morning, and then last night, the Department of Homeland Security released their report that said that domestic extremism is the single most significant threat to the homeland. So I've got to say, we've got this hate we're dealing with in Atlanta. We've got a rise of domestic extremism. All of us need to come together, whether you're in civil society, business, in the media, elected office. We need a whole of society of strategy to really tackle this threat once and for all.
All right, Anti-Defamation League CEO Jonathan Greenblatt joining us live this morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Taking a live look now, everybody, at Capitol Hill. More news now from Fox is 2 minutes away.